The envelope sat on the mahogany kitchen table like a ticking bomb, its seal unbroken, yet I knew exactly what lay inside. The eviction notice for the house I had paid for with my own inheritance. My husband Mark walked in a moment later, whistling a melody he usually reserved for our Sunday mornings, oblivious to the fact that his mother had successfully legally erased me from my own life while I was at the grocery store. The silence in our house was usually a sanctuary, a carefully curated atmosphere of soft jazz, the scent of lavender candles, and the gleaming surfaces of a home I had spent years meticulously restoring. I had met Mark during a chaotic charity gala, where his calm demeanor and steady hands seemed like the perfect antidote to my high-pressure career in corporate law. He was a contractor, a man who worked with wood and stone, someone who seemed grounded in reality, unlike the fragile glass ceilings I shattered every day in the office. We were the perfect team. I brought the strategy and the capital, and he brought the structure and the warmth. Or so I believed. His mother, Eleanor, had been the shadow in our periphery since the day we married. She was a woman of sharp angles and even sharper opinions, who viewed my success not as a triumph, but as a threat to her son's manhood. At first it was subtle, the backhanded compliments about my career-driven neglect of the household, or the way she would rearrange my kitchen cabinets to suit her own sense of order. I tolerated her because she was family, and because Mark would always pull me aside, squeeze my hand and whisper, "She's just old-fashioned, honey. Let it slide. She doesn't mean it." I loved him, and I trusted that he was buffering her influence, softening the edges of her disapproval with his own devotion. I remember the afternoon we signed the deed to this house, this sprawling, craftsman-style masterpiece on the edge of the woods. It was meant to be a legacy. I had insisted that the house be in my name, a safeguard for the future I was building for us. But Eleanor had been strangely insistent that Mark be added to the title for traditional reasons. I had relented, mostly because Mark looked so proud holding the pen, his eyes shining with the kind of love that made me feel like the center of his universe. I didn't see the flicker of a smile on Eleanor's face when I signed those papers, a look that wasn't about love, but about conquest. Life felt like a well-oiled machine. I worked late, I paid the mortgage, and I came home to a husband who smelled like cedarwood and coffee. The only disruption in our rhythm was Eleanor, who seemed to have developed an uncanny interest in our finances. She would stop by unannounced, asking intrusive questions about my tax returns or whether I had signed a prenuptial agreement. "You know, dear," she would say, her eyes darting toward the documents on my desk. "A marriage is a partnership of assets, not just hearts. Mark worries that you don't fully trust him because you keep your accounts so separate." I would laugh it off, pouring her a cup of chamomile tea, feeling the slight tension in the room that I refused to acknowledge. I wanted to believe that the friction was just a clash of generations, a misunderstanding of values. Mark would usually wander in, plant a kiss on the top of my head, and distract us with stories of his day. It was a comfortable, curated reality, and I was so deeply invested in the facade of happiness that I ignored the cracks forming in the foundation. I was the one who bought the expensive paint, the one who chose the hardwood floors, and the one who made sure the bills were paid on time, never realizing that the man I slept beside was slowly helping his mother draft the blueprints for my destruction. I was comfortable in my bubble, convinced that my intellect and my independence were the armor that protected me from the world. I didn't see that the enemy wasn't at the gate. The enemy was sitting at my table, eating my food and sleeping in my bed, waiting for the right moment to turn the key and lock me out of my own existence. The scent of that lavender candle, which used to signify peace, now seems like a cover-up for the rot that had been spreading beneath the floorboards all along. I was the architect of my own demise, blinded by the love I thought I had earned, never suspecting that the man holding my hand was the same one preparing to let it go. The first real tremor in my life came on a Tuesday, hidden behind a misplaced folder. I had been looking for our insurance documents to update our coverage when I found a strange, heavy manila envelope tucked behind the wine rack in the pantry. It wasn't the usual place for household records, and the handwriting on the label, a cramped, jagged script, belonged undeniably to Eleanor. My heart did a strange, stuttering skip, but I shoved the feeling down, chiding myself for being suspicious. That night, I asked Mark about it over dinner. The way he froze, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth, told me more than words ever could. "Oh, that," he said, his voice a pitch higher than usual as he set the fork down with a sharp clink against the porcelain. "That's just some tax paperwork Mom wanted me to look over for her. You know how she gets with her estate planning, always panicking over something minor." He gave me one of his trademark lopsided grins, the kind that usually melted my resolve, but that evening it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were scanning the kitchen, looking for an exit strategy. I wanted to believe him, but the image of that envelope, stashed in the pantry, away from the office, gnawed at me. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the house shifted from serene to suffocating. My phone would ring, and when I answered, there would be nothing but the faint sound of breathing before the line clicked dead. Then, the banking alert started. A notification on my phone pinged during a board meeting, informing me of an unauthorized inquiry into my primary savings account. When I confronted Mark, he claimed it was a glitch in the banking app, promising to call their support line the next day. But he never did. And then there were the unannounced visits from a man in a grey suit, a real estate attorney, I later realized, who would leave through the back door just as I pulled into the driveway. Mark always brushed it off as consultations for his contracting firm. The final, crushing realization came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had returned home early because of a migraine, the house silent and heavy with the smell of damp earth. As I walked toward my home office, I heard voices coming from the living room, Mark and Eleanor. I moved closer, my pulse hammering against my ribs, an instinctual dread rising in my throat. "She's been suspicious lately, Mark." Eleanor's voice was cold, stripped of her usual saccharine sweetness. "You need to finish this. The court order is ready. If you don't file the transfer today, she'll notice the balance shift by the end of the month." "I know, Mother," Mark replied, his voice devoid of the warmth he used with me. It's hard. She's been good to me." "She's been an obstacle to your inheritance," she snapped. "Sign the power of attorney over to me, and I'll handle the rest. By the time she wakes up tomorrow, this house will be in my name, and you'll be free of this prison." The world tilted on its axis. My ears began to ring, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the rhythmic patter of the rain against the window. I felt the air leave the room, my lungs burning as I tried to draw a breath that refused to come. My hands, usually so steady when navigating complex litigation, shook so violently that I had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. I stumbled toward my desk, my vision blurring, and saw the laptop open. There it was, the screen glowing with an open PDF. A grant deed transferring the ownership of my property to Eleanor, accompanied by a forged signature that looked hauntingly like my own. I fell back into the chair, the room spinning, the walls seeming to lean in as if to crush me. I felt a wave of nausea, cold and acidic, rising in my chest. My husband, the man I had built a life with, the man I had trusted with my secrets and my heart, was not just stealing my home, he was orchestrating my exile. I looked down at my own hands, the hands that had worked 70-hour weeks to pay for the bricks and the mortar, and suddenly they felt like they belonged to someone else. I wasn't just a wife, I was a Mark. And the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow to the stomach. I was entirely, devastatingly alone. The silence that had once felt like peace now sounded like the closing of a tomb. I was trapped, and for the first time in my life, I had absolutely no idea how to fight back. I didn't scream, I didn't faint. A cold, crystalline clarity washed over me, numbing the panic and turning my veins into ice. I stood up, smoothing my skirt with trembling fingers, and walked toward the living room. Each step felt like walking through deep water, When I reached the arched doorway, I didn't announce myself. I simply leaned against the frame, watching them. Mark was sitting at the mahogany desk, pen in hand, his head bowed. Eleanor stood behind him, her hand resting firmly on his shoulder, a predatory gleam in her eyes. It was a tableau of betrayal. "The signature isn't quite right, Mark," Eleanor hissed, leaning closer. "You need to make the flourish on the R more pronounced, like her grandmother's old letters. Use the sample I gave you." "I don't think I can do this," Mark whispered, his voice cracking. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of the man I thought I knew, hesitant, guilty, pathetic. "You don't have a choice," she countered, her voice dropping to a dangerous, low register. "Unless you want to go back to that two-bedroom apartment and the job you hate, you sign it. You are a man, Mark, not a servant. This house is your birthright, stolen by her corporate greed. Think of it as reclaiming what is ours." I cleared my throat. The sound was small, but in the tense silence of the room, it shattered the air like a gunshot. Mark jumped, the pen skidding across the expensive parchment, leaving a jagged, ink-stained scar. He whirled around, his face draining of all color. Eleanor, however, didn't flinch. She straightened her posture, her eyes narrowing as they locked onto mine. There was no shame in her gaze, only a flick of annoyance, as if a servant had interrupted her dinner. "Well," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with smooth, manufactured calm. "I suppose you are bound to find out eventually. You are always so nosy, dear." "Is this a joke?" I heard my voice, distant and hollow, as if it belonged to a stranger. I walked into the room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. "A forgery? A power of attorney? Mark, look at me." He looked, but he couldn't hold my gaze. His eyes skittered to the wall, to the carpet, to his mother, anywhere but my face. "It's not like that, Sarah," he muttered, his voice barely audible. It's complicated. We just need to reorganize the assets, for tax purposes." "Tax purposes?" I let out a short, jagged laugh that sounded more like a sob. "You're forging my signature to deed my home to your mother. That isn't a tax strategy, Mark. That's a felony." Eleanor stepped forward, her hand moving to her throat in a practiced gesture of mock distress. "Oh, stop the histrionics. You work 80 hours a week. You don't even live in this house. You treat it like a hotel. We are merely taking care of the maintenance and the future of this family. Mark deserves a home that doesn't feel like a corporate office." "A home?" I walked right up to her, invading her space until I could smell the sharp, metallic tang of her perfume. "You've been planning this since the day we got married, haven't you? Everything. The help with the accounts, the intrusions, the subtle manipulations. You didn't want a daughter-in-law. You wanted a benefactor." Mark stood up, his chair clattering back against the floorboards. "Sarah, listen, she's right about one thing. You don't have time for us. You never have time for me. Maybe if you'd focused on your marriage instead of your billable hours, we wouldn't be here." The betrayal hit me harder than the theft. It wasn't just about the money. It was the way he was rewriting our history to justify his cowardice. "You coward," I whispered, the words hitting him square in the chest. "You weren't neglected. You were pampered. I gave you everything, and all you could do was wait for your mother to tell you it was okay to take it." "Give me the pen, Mark," Eleanor commanded, her voice sharpening into a blade. She reached for his hand, but I snatched the document off the desk before she could move. I held it up, watching the ink smudge where his hand had slipped. "You think this is the end?" I looked from his pathetic, slumped shoulders to her iron-hard face. "You think you can just erase me? I'm an attorney, Mark. I know exactly what a felony looks like in a court of law. And I know exactly how much time you'll serve for this." "You won't do it," Eleanor smiled, a thin, cruel line. "Think of the scandal, your reputation, your firm. You'll be the woman who was cheated by her husband and mother-in-law. It will destroy your career." You're too smart to lose your job over a house. She reached out to grab the paper, but I stepped back, my eyes locking onto hers with a sudden, icy clarity. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was an opponent. And for the first time in my life, I felt the thrill of the hunt. The air in the room was heavy, vibrating with the sudden shift in power. Eleanor's arrogance was a tangible thing, a thick wall she'd built to hide her desperation. She still thought she held the cards, convinced that my professional pride would keep me silent. She had miscalculated entirely. Scandal, I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, steady calm. Eleanor, you've spent your life operating in the shadows of small-town gossip. You have no idea how a courtroom works when the evidence is irrefutable. Mark moved a step between us, his hands held up in a placating gesture, his face a mask of sweating panic.
Sarah, please, put it down. We can talk about this. We can split the proceeds. We can...
Split the proceeds? I looked at him with such profound disgust that he actually recoiled. You think this is a business negotiation? You tried to steal the roof over my head. You sold our vows for a down payment to Mother's approval. I did it for us, he shouted, his mask finally slipping, revealing the petulant, weak man underneath. I did it because I was tired of feeling like a guest in your life. Every dinner, every trip, every piece of furniture, it was yours. I wanted something that was mine too. Mom just helped me see that I was being robbed of my own potential. You weren't robbed, Mark. You were provided for, I said, my voice cutting through his outburst like a razor. And since you're so interested in what's yours, let's talk about the offshore account I found during the audit you were too stupid to hide. The silence that followed was absolute.
Eleanor's face lost its composure, her features twitching. Mark's jaw went slack.
What are you talking about? Mark stammered. The one in the Cayman Islands, I lied, though my pulse quickened at the sheer perfection of the bluff. The one where you've been funneling the maintenance funds for the last 18 months. I have the wire transfer logs, Mark. I have the timestamps. And I have the email you sent to your offshore contact, asking how to liquidate the property without my knowledge. It was a gamble, a massive, reckless, legal-grade bluff. But the look of pure terror that crossed Mark's face confirmed that I had struck a nerve. Not the one I intended, but a much deeper, uglier one. That was just a contingency, Mark stammered, turning toward his mother as if she could protect him. I told you we should have been more careful. Eleanor grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. Shut up, you fool.
She whirled on me, her eyes flashing with a desperate, venomous light.
You have nothing. A few emails don't prove intent. This house is legally in our hands as of this morning. I already filed the change of ownership at the county clerk's office at noon. By the time you get to a judge, you'll be a guest in this house, and I'll have the legal right to evict you by Monday. She pulled a folded document from her purse, the official, stamped confirmation of the transfer. She waved it in front of my face, a trophy of her petty, small-minded victory. You're smart, Sarah, she sneered, but you're a woman fighting a system designed by people like me. You lose. You walk away with your dignity and your job, or you stay and get dragged through a legal mud pit that will cost you everything you've worked for. Choose. I felt the paper in my hand, the forged deed, and then looked at the official document in hers. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was cold, focused, and lethal.
I realized then that I didn't need to fight them with their rules. I needed to burn their playground down.
You're right, Eleanor, I said, my voice eerily soft. I am smart. Which is why I didn't come home today just to cry. I came home to finish the transaction. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen, turning on the speakerphone. A woman's voice, crisp and professional, filled the room. Detective Miller, Fraud Division. We have received your digital evidence package, Miss Vance. The IP addresses for the fraudulent wire transfers match the residential address on file. We are dispatching a cruiser to your location to secure the scene as a crime site. Mark's knees gave way and he slumped onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. Eleanor's face turned a shade of sickly mottled grey. The trophy in her hand suddenly looked like a death warrant. "You called the police?" she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. "I didn't just call the police," I said, walking toward the door to open it for the officers I knew were turning into the driveway. "I invited the entire precinct to watch the unraveling of your legacy. And trust me, Eleanor, I've spent the last 4 hours drafting the formal charges, including the forgery, the wire fraud, and the conspiracy to commit grand larceny." I turned back to them, my shadow stretching long and dark across the floor. "The house isn't yours, Eleanor. It's a crime scene, and you two are no longer family. You're suspects." The police lights painted the living room in rhythmic flashes of blue and red, casting long, frantic shadows against the walls that had once felt like home. Watching the officers place Mark in handcuffs was not the cathartic explosion I had imagined. It was quiet, clinical, and profoundly sad. He didn't fight. He didn't even look at me. He just stared at the floor, a broken man who had traded a life of substance for his mother's hollow approval. Eleanor was a different story. As they let her out, her face was a mask of vitriol, her voice spitting accusations at the officers, then at the neighbors who had gathered on the lawn. She looked small, desperate, and utterly pathetic. The woman who had tried to orchestrate a legal coup was now screaming about her rights, but her voice lost its power in the face of the concrete reality of the felony charges. I stood on the porch, my arms crossed, watching the taillights of the patrol cars vanish down the driveway. I felt a chill, but it wasn't from the autumn air. It was the final shedding of the woman I used to be. The following months were a blur of depositions, forensic accounting, and court hearings. The bluff I had pulled about the offshore account turned out, through a twist of chaotic fate, to be a partial reality. Mark had indeed been skimming, just not as much as I had guessed. The evidence was mountainous. The forged signature, the backdated documents, and the emails Eleanor had arrogantly saved on the household server provided a roadmap of their conspiracy that left the defense with nowhere to hide. I didn't stay in the house while the legal gears ground them down. I moved into a small, modern apartment in the heart of a city, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows and absolutely nothing in it that belonged to my past. I stopped taking the safe cases at my firm. I became a shark, fueled by the cold clarity of that night. When the verdict finally came down, guilty on all counts, with mandatory prison time for both, I didn't celebrate. I simply sat in my office, looked out at the skyline, and exhaled for the first time in years. Mark eventually sent me a letter from the facility, filled with apologies, excuses, and pleas for forgiveness. I didn't open it. I dropped it into the shredder, watching the words disappear into grey confetti. Eleanor, I heard, lost everything. Her pension, her reputation in the community, and finally, the son she had tried to mold in her own image. 6 months later, I walked back to the house for the final inspection before the sale. It was quiet, stripped of the curated decor I had once thought defined me. I stood on the porch, the same porch where I had once waited for Mark to come home, smelling of cedarwood and lies. The air felt different now. It smelled of possibility. I was no longer the woman who needed a partner to feel complete, or a house to feel secure. I was whole, entirely on my own, and the architecture of my life was finally mine to design. I left the key in the mailbox and turned my back on the property without a backward glance. My life was no longer a story written by others or a cage built by those who claim to love me. It was a blank page, and for the first time, I held the pen.
Freedom, I realized, wasn't about what you kept. It was about what you had the courage to let go of.